one other thing that came up, Senator Van Hollen, is with the package that you're working on in the Senate, and then the House obviously has their package that they're working on. Is there an underlying understanding that the two bills would be are very similar in nature as you all are working on that through the Senate and what's going through the House?
Well, we hope that there will be a lot of overlap, and obviously to the extent that we can get this bill in the Senate to be strongly bipartisan with overwhelming support. The hope, of course, would be that that could just go right through the House of Representatives. I mean, and so that's why it's important that the House be part of this conversation. Unfortunately, they've been kind of excluded at the beginning, but we're now, they're now more in the loop, and we need to get this done. Obviously, as you can imagine, there are lots of details, and when you're talking about package that could be in the $2 trillion range, you want to move very quickly, but you also need to get it right. And so, again, people are working around the clock on all these different pieces. I mean, there are a number of pieces regarding a Fed lending window for sort of, mid-sized businesses. That's more a credit fund. Small businesses, again, we're really focused on what are effectively grants, because if you're a very small business and you have no customers coming in the door, that obviously means no income. It means you can't pay the bills, and simply, deferring all that debt for 3 or 4 months would just saddle a small business with unpayable debts at the end of the 3 months, which is why those are structured in the form of forgivable loans that will be forgiven at the end of the period. Again, the accountability provision is that the small business has to, comply, use those monies for the purposes that are directed. Again, primarily meeting payroll, and second, paying fixed costs.
And then one other question, Senator. Do you all anticipate, I know everything is so fluid and changes really almost by the minute, it seems like, with everything that's going on. But as far as the idea of that, if this becomes more prolonged, that there could even be a phase 4 to the stimulus as we go into the summer?
Yes. Look, if this goes on for months and months, if this goes on, more than 3 months, you're going to certainly have to come back. We may have to. Once this gets through, there still may be gaps that need to be plugged. But certainly, if this continues for a long time, like into late summer, you're going to need additional relief. I'm already concerned that the small business relief provisions in this bill are too short a time frame. Anyways, we're trying to negotiate these things out. It's going to be far from a perfect bill. But the short answer to your question is, yes, we may have to come back for future rounds as things develop.
Great. Senator, I know things are crazy. I can't thank you enough for all of your support, your continued support of credit unions, and willingness to give us your time, especially in as crazy of a time as we're in today, and as all of the demands on your time. So again,
thank you, John, and thank you and your team there and all your members. And I know you're fielding a lot of questions too at this time of uncertainty. So
yeah, credit.
Good to be with you.
It's great to be with you, and thank you for I think the key issues really just in closing is making sure that as you mentioned before, making sure that it's parallel as far as any type of relief or anything that's being considered, that credit unions are specifically included in that. I think during this time, this is when, as we've seen in all other crises, credit unions shine in the way that they step up and serve their communities. So again, thank you very much.
Right. We want to make sure that there's there's parity in all the areas that it's required, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Well,
Very good.
thank you again, and good luck with everything. Thanks for all of your hard work.
And thank you. Take care.
So what I wanted to do is just welcome everybody. Thank all of you for your patience. We're going to start going into the rest of the meeting. Thanks for the questions that you got in. Tried to summarize some of those that came in. Some of you were texting. I appreciate that. I'm just going to reiterate, we had a huge response. I know we've got a lot of folks on the phone. We've also want to just remind everybody, please just mute us. Don't put us on hold, and use the chat question. Just so you know, I've gotten a lot of questions with regards to Maryland restrictions. I've had a question if there's martial law invoked or stay in place. All of those things, credit unions and the banking sector continue to be considered essential employees. So the underlying theme to what that means is the things you're doing today, as far as essential employees are concerned, you continue to do. And I appreciate, in talking to many folks last week and yesterday, all the efforts that you're doing to protect your employees, to protect your members, and to continue to keep things moving forward. So the orders that have been issued yesterday by Governor Hogan and others don't change in DC and Virginia. They don't change the need for credit unions to continue to operate. We have some speakers coming up here very quickly that will be able to address things from the NCUA level, from Maryland and from DC. But again, the definition of essential workers, credit union employees, are included in that. So that will continue. The one thing that we do have that we want to thank John Bredehoff from Kaufman and Knowles for putting together is we'll have up on our resource page, we'll have a employee exemption letter example that you could use. There's language for Maryland, for DC, for Virginia, for Delaware, that if you have an employee that is driving to work or from work, it would be a letter just as more of a precautionary issue in case they were asked by law enforcement, why are they on the road, where are they going? They would have something on your letterhead that would indicate that they were working for an essential business. So with that, there's no questions as I can see. We again want to thank Senator Van Hollen, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to loop John Cutchy in from the NCUA Eastern Region Regional Director. John, can you hear me?
I got you, John.
Hopefully everybody can hear Regional Director Cutchy. John, I'll let you go ahead and get started. I've got up on the slide, I know the NCUA has been able to do, it looks like pushing out some great guidance with regard to, I know, annual meeting guidance, and then also if you could maybe give some updates on that, or just a brief summary for those that may not have seen that.
Sure, absolutely, John. I'll all the things that are on the screen, I'll touch on. And before I get into my comments, just to let everybody know, if you haven't been out there, if you go to our website, ncua.gov, right up on the home screen is a COVID-19 resource page, and it's going to have the written answers to everything that you see up on the screen. Will be there, but I want to highlight some things to you as part of this discussion. So thanks, John, for the invite. Our best opportunity as an agency to be responsive is to talk live to the credit unions who are dealing with this every day. So I appreciate this invite, as well as the other ones I've gotten from around the region. So before I get started, just to let you know, I do more than just sympathize and empathize with you. In my duties as regional director, one of the things I have is when we have a conservatorship, NCUA fills the role of the credit union board. And right now we have a $3 billion shop in the heart of Manhattan, municipal credit union that's in conservatorship. So all the things that you're dealing with in real time, do I keep branches open? Do I close them? Do I go to a appointment only type lobby? Do I increase cash? What types of things do I offer in loan products? I'm having to make those decisions in real time with the credit union conservatorship team. So I do feel your pain. It's an incredibly challenging time. Information is coming from every angle, and it's just hard to keep up right now. And I just want to let you know I understand that. So give you a little bit of background. NCUA is in a full off-site posture at this point. All of our employees are working remotely. We have orders to our staff that they are not to travel on-site to credit union operations at this point without my prior consent and approval, and I'm only approving those for the most severe problem cases that we have at this point. So you're not going to see your examiner on site for an extended period. Yesterday, we notified our staff that we're going to be in this off-site posture at least through April 17th, and we'll reevaluate a week or two before that. And we're basically taking our cues from what's going on around the country in terms of what is being reported as safe and unsafe. So we will continue this off-site posture as long as necessary to protect our staff and to protect your staff as well. One of the things we are kicking off is virtual examinations during this time period. So you may be contacted by your NCUA examiner to start an examination or a contact, but I want you to know that we are incredibly flexible during this time period. We understand that you are dealing with a lot of issues, a lot of unknowns, you're adjusting on the fly, and to be perfectly blunt with you, in a lot of cases, the last thing you need at this point is an NCUA examiner in your business requesting documents from you. To the extent that you can do it, please do. But we also understand that this may not be the best time for you to have your examiner doing an exam of your credit union. If this posture goes on long term, then the off-site examinations may morph over time, but we have been working really hard for the last few weeks to come up with some off-site procedures, things that we can do purely remote without having to be live and in person with you. So we have that. In terms of liquidity, one of the big things and focuses for the agency is making sure cash is available to credit unions. As the senator talked about earlier, there is a bit of a agency or a credit union package that's being proposed right now and floated, and some of that includes, I believe, some increased authority for the central liquidity facility at the agency to make sure we have cash available. We have been getting updates from corporate credit unions who are telling us that they are loaded with cash. They have no strains or stresses going on at this point in time. They are seeing a little bit heavier activity in terms of cash requests, which is honestly consistent with what we've been hearing across the country. People are going up and taking larger amounts out of ATMs than they normally would. Some credit unions are reporting that there are members walking into their branches and wanting to leave with a shopping bag of cash. So we are seeing that all over, but not in any kind of a large way that's putting stress on the industry. Again, as the weeks go by, that may change. So the agency is trying to be very proactive at this point and making sure there are liquidity backstops for the credit unions as needed. One of the things you're probably going to see from us in the not too distant future will be some phone calls to credit unions that we think could end up in liquidity constraints or have some limitations based on their current balance sheet structure. So we're always encouraging you to have at least 2 backup sources of liquidity in addition to what's already in your balance sheet. but we'll talk about that in the future, and you may have some phone calls from credit union from your credit union examiner. We're encouraging for those who are eligible, Federal Reserve Bank discount window, the CLF. If you're not a member and you'd like to join the central liquidity facility, we are strongly encouraging that. It makes more liquidity available, not just to you, but to the system. Corporate credit unions, of course, are always our primary backstop for the industry, and the Federal Home Loan Banks are a couple of the examples of what we suggest. We are encouraging forbearance programs for credit union members, as the senator articulated very well. This is a huge hit to the economy, and this is a huge hit to your members. A lot of them are not collecting paychecks right now or are about to lose their paychecks. So anything that you can do to help them through this time, we are strongly encouraging. And that leads to one of the questions that's been coming up a lot is troubled debt restructuring. What's the impact of offering those types of forbearance programs on my balance sheet and how I account for them? So you may not have seen this yet, but on that COVID-19 resource page that I referenced to you, we posted on Sunday some guidance, interagency guidance on troubled debt restructuring. So I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from that I think may give you some comfort in how we're approaching this. So the first key sentence: the agencies have confirmed with staff at the Financial Accounting Standards Board that short-term modifications made on a good faith basis in response to COVID-19 to borrowers who were current prior to any relief are not TDRs. So FASB has opined that if you're implementing a program and you're doing things, you're waiving fees, you're eliminating interest, you're deferring payments, as long as the member was already in good standing prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, that would not be a TDR on your books, and you would also not have to count that as past due in your system as well. So there's two other sentences that I'll read to you because I don't want to, since this is being recorded, I want to make sure that the agency's message is accurate. It says the agency's examiners will exercise judgment in reviewing loan modifications, including TDRs, and will not automatically adversely risk rate credits that are affected by COVID-19, including those considered TDRs. And the other key sentence, again, I kind of alluded to this in past due reporting already. With regard to loans not otherwise reportable as past due, financial institutions are not expected to designate loans with deferrals granted due to COVID-19 as past due because of the deferral. So I hope that gives you some comfort in the flexibilities and us understanding the situation and the need to work with borrowers and giving you as much latitude without feeling like you're being penalized in any way for helping your members out. One of the things as the regional director here in the Eastern region, I've been stressing to staff is to do everything they can to be helpful to credit unions during this time period. I'm personally not worried so much about doing examinations as I am making sure that you all get through this current challenging situation. So I've asked them to offer the assistance to you, sharing their expertise, helping to maybe facilitate some contacts and relationships with other credit unions and resources that you may need to deal with this time frame. So I'm hoping that message comes through clear to you from my staff as we go forward. So that's a lot of information in a really short time period. The other thing I wanted to bring your attention to, since it was on the list, is annual meetings. So we issued a letter to credit unions, I think it was back last Thursday. It's letter to credit unions 20-FCU-02. And again, it's on this resource page, but it basically gives you the ability to do virtual annual meetings. And there's in this letter to credit unions, there's the actual verbiage for a bylaw amendment that your board simply needs to ratify. It's already written. You don't have to go through any office clearance to get it approved. You can just adopt it if you want to. And if you do that, it gives you the ability to virtually conduct your annual meeting. And of course, you always have the ability to defer the meeting if you want to do it live and in person later in the year, when hopefully this is all past us. You have that ability too, but if you want to kind of stay on schedule and you've got vacancies and you want to get people in place, you do have that virtual option without need for further approval. So hopefully some of that tells you that the agency's trying as hard as it can to give you flexibilities, to get out of your way, and let you deal with the situation that's in front of you. So John, if you got any other questions for me that are coming in, I'm more than willing to answer, or I can defer to the next presenter.
John, thanks. I appreciate that. We had two other questions. One is more of a question about what the NCUA and associations are doing to help low-income credit unions and CDFI credit unions. I know to address one thing, I know that one of the things that we've pushed for in the stimulus package is an additional $200 million in grant money, in CDFI grant money. That's one thing in the immediate issue that's being addressed and being focused on. And I know, I don't know if the agency is looking at other resources for those credit unions right now. I know there's a variety of things that are being looked at as things are kind of coming so quickly. But I didn't know if you're aware of anything else that's specific to those two areas.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know of new programs, but we are advertising emergency need grants for low-income credit unions. So I'm looking on the resource pages we're talking to see if I can find that announcement, and I don't see it yet. But I know that I saw a draft press release circulate yesterday that kind of is advertising the emergency need grants. So we have money available to credit unions that need to fill some resources. I know particularly in the smaller credit unions, you know, these are small shops and they're 1 or 2 person organizations. And if one of them is out sick or both of them, you could have a situation there where, so we're trying to help make sure that we can help facilitate some relationships. So if a small credit union is running into staffing problems, there might be a mid-size or a larger credit union in the area that can help donate staff members to keep a credit union operation going and accessible to their members. That's one of the things I'm emphasizing to the Eastern Region Examiner staff, is to help be a facilitator if that type of situation evolves. But we do have the emergency grants, and we also have the Community Development Revolving Loan Fund. So if people need cash, that's one of the other mechanisms. The interest rates on those are extremely low. So that's another avenue that you can go. And if you go to the NCUA webpage and look up the Office of Credit Union Resource and Expansion, there's information on regarding our grants program and our loan program as well.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Couple of other questions that have come in, John, are around the idea of when a member calls with regard to a, where they need relief or need to ask for deferment or need, whether it's mortgages or other loans. Is there any type of a guideline? And I think this is a pretty common question that we've fielded over the last week, really. Is there any guidance around what constitutes verification of that? Is that does the credit union make that judgment through their discussions with the individual with the member? Do they need to have some kind of hard documentation from the borrower, from the member to do that? Or is that really left up to the judgment of the credit union to be consistent in how they do that?
Yeah, it would be, to me, it's credit union by credit union, John. I mean, everybody's field of membership has some nuances to it. So what might work in credit union A may not be a program that is suitable for credit union B. So I would say it would need to be tailored to that credit union specific issues. And really it's a business decision at that point as to what the credit union feels like it can afford to do. But the one thing I caution everyone on is whatever you decide to do as a credit union, you need to do it consistently. So there aren't concerns regarding preferential treatment or discrimination in the future. So whatever program you offer, you need to make it available to the membership as a whole. But really that's the only thing in my mind that the credit union needs to worry about at this point. And kind of on that front, I think as I referred to the TDR guidance, and it talked about, you've got members who are impacted by COVID-19. At this point, the President of the United States has declared a national state of emergency. So in my opinion, every credit union is impacted by COVID-19. So that should be the clearance that whatever you offer in terms of a program to help your members is covered under the COVID-19 scenario.
Thanks, Jen. It seems like one of the other questions, a couple of things have come up is with regards to quorums for meetings, whether it's virtual or in person. Is there consideration to be flexible in that context as far as what constitutes a quorum for a credit union?
In reference to the annual meeting, it says that the amendment that we've posted that credit unions can adapt, it says this credit union may hold its annual meeting of the members and special member meetings for authorized purposes other than member expulsion virtually and without an in-person quorum if the following conditions are met. And basically the condition is if you're doing this because you're impacted by COVID-19. And again, we talk about a little bit later in the letter that since the president proclaimed a national emergency, we consider you to be impacted. So the letter to credit unions, I think, is pretty well done and provides a lot of those answers.
Great, and that the letter we'll have up on the resource page for credit unions to take a look at as well. I think that's really the questions that we have from everybody for right now. I just want to thank you for being available. I know last week we had quite a few conversations and talking with Commissioner Salazar here in Maryland, especially when it came to what is considered open for business for a credit union with all of the rapid fire changes that happened last week and accessibility. So that was greatly appreciated.
Always, and we know that this is an evolving situation. It seems like every day or every 2 days, there tends to be a major shift in direction of what's going on. And that's not to fault anyone. That's not criticism. It's just the nature of what we're dealing with, which is unprecedented. So I'm always available if you need me back for anything for future conversations. I look forward to the opportunity.
Fantastic. We'll take you up on that. Thanks so much. We're going to move on to, let's see, Commissioner Salazar. If you can take yourself off mute, I wanted to thank Commissioner Salazar and Deputy Commissioner Laro for making time for us today, and also just all of last week to provide any type of guidance and support. I know in our conversations that we've had in the past, the commissioner's concerns are similar to what we've been talking about. So I just wanted to open it up to Commissioner if you'd like to say a few words and also take any questions that you might have.
Great, John. Thank you very much. I want to extend my appreciation to you and your team for setting this up, giving us the opportunity. Last week, we spoke with some local credit unions as well. And, at this time, information is important. Getting it to us getting it out to the industry and to you, and you and the association have been wonderful in helping in that linchpin effort. So let me just tell the participants here a little bit about our office. FINREG, as we call it, the Office of the Commissioner, has implemented its contingency plans like a lot of the other state agencies. We are operating remotely. So the good news is that the contingency plans have worked for our office and we're able to do so. So our phone numbers have been ported to the various remote locations. So if you need to contact Teresa or myself or other members of the staff, you can use our regular phone numbers. Our emails are all up and running. Our web page on the Department of Labor's website has a section for information on the COVID-19 and what's been done. So I'd encourage members to go to that site as well. So we are happy to say we're up and running, and that's good. We've been in coordination with, as you know, with the other federal regulators, with other state agencies, so as well as with the governor's office. And when I mention information, when issues come up that you all believe are important, funnel them through John. John gets them to us, and we have access up through the secretary into the governor's office so that concerns can be addressed at that level. On some of the issues, I guess I'll make it short because Director Cutchy covered a lot of them, and I would say that our office is in alignment with the NCUA and the federal regulators on a lot of those positions, and also what Senator Van Hollen said. Some of the important points are to us. We emphasized last week that access for members and others into the financial system is important. It's been our priority, and we appreciate the efforts that the credit unions have made to allow members to continue to have access and at the same time protect their employees and comply with the governor's orders in terms of social distancing. So that's great. We are, willing to use a lot of flexibility in terms of the access issues. As the director mentioned, an annual meeting as well. We were happy to see that the federal regulators came out with the TDR guidance. One point is also that the FASB came out right on the heels of the federal regulators, and there is basically a short issuance from FASB that can be summarized as we agree with everything they said. So if you need to have that, your accountants will probably have that, but it's basically a paragraph that they agree with the TDR guidance. So that's good news. Some considerations that I can throw out for some of your members is that unfortunately during this time people need to be aware of frauds and scams. And while we're all working remotely, there's an increase in phishing. There's remote access risks. So, while you're trying to juggle all your other responsibilities of keeping the organization running and providing services, just a reminder to keep up the IT protections and remind the employees to be extra vigilant at this time. I would say also in terms of the cash withdrawals that have been happening, physical access risks are also important, just to be aware. If there's ATMs that aren't being used or other areas that aren't being used, they need to be safeguarded. And members reminded that taking large sums of cash out is probably not a good idea because money's safe in institutions, and there's plenty of access. Obviously, pushing people to the electronic portals is important. Last but not least, vendor management. That's important. You should be communicating with all your important vendors to anticipate what's going to happen. None of us knows how long this is going to go on, but there should be thinking ahead. They should have their contingency plans. You're going to want to know what they're going to be doing, what their capability is in the next week or 2 weeks. I mean, clearly this situation, you know, as the senator suggested and as others, will go on through at least a good chunk of April. So people need to be making sure not only their own operations are good, but what are their vendors? Are they able to continue? What are their contingency plans? So to sum it up, just one last point on the essential employees. I think it's a great idea, John, that your organization's providing the guidance on the letter for employees. There is no specific requirement in Maryland that there be any type of papers or identification, but I know that you know, the governor has expressed his sense that, you know, people are not really complying with the stay-at-home orders. So there's going to be more strict enforcement of that, and the letter's a great idea. So really appreciate you all taking the lead on doing that. Just to be aware that the guidance on essential businesses included the credit unions, but you should know that it also includes, you know, the people that help the credit unions and your service providers as well, in case any questions come up. So ATM repairs, you know, cash deliveries, armored car services, things like that are all considered essential to help you carry out your mission. So again, thank you. I appreciate you know, the opportunity to be here today. I know the credit unions have come through in past instances like the shutdown and other natural disasters, and you know, thank you for all your efforts. If we can help, our goal is to be flexible and to let you meet your members' needs. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Commissioner. We had one question which centered around the issue that is there parity with the NCUA's rule on annual meeting flexibility and the ability to go virtual? Is that acceptable also for state chartered institutions?
We would be flexible. I'd have to, you know, understand that in terms of each particular institution. So I'd say just let us, you know, give us a heads up as to what the plan is. And obviously we're guided by what Maryland credit union and corporate statutes say. They do provide some flexibility in there for virtual, you know, meetings and things like that. So contact us on that front.
Great, we will. And I do want to thank Commissioner Salazar. Last week was, as things were happening, it got a little tense as far as what was considered open for business. So I think the ability to have the state and the federal regulators together, since the governor's office funnels everything through you with regards to these issues as far as open for business, and the fact that whether it's, you know, restricted hours, whether it's having some offices open, some closed, some lobby hours by appointment, drive-throughs, that's been very, very helpful to provide clarification to everybody. If anybody has any questions after, as always, feel free to let us know, and then we will get with Commissioner Salazar. I also want to thank Associate Commissioner Brian Williams. Brian was with us, but he got called off to a meeting. So unfortunately, if there's a specific DC question, please let us know, and we can get with Associate Commissioner Williams, or many of you have Roy Murray's contact information from our office. You can contact him directly. And I'm going to hand this off to John Redehoff. John's going to, I think one of the biggest things that we've talked about, and a lot of the questions that we've been getting, especially over the weekend, have been focused more around, we've transitioned from a lot of the questions about physical access to the credit unions. How do we handle, how's the definition of essential? Now we've really gotten more to, okay, now I have to operationalize this, and what are the effects on my my operations? So I'm going to hand this over to John and let him get going. And John, take it away.
Thanks, John. I see my pictures up there. Please be assured that I have self-quarantined for 2 weeks, and my hair is much longer than that right now. I'm glad we don't have video. I want to talk very quickly about 4 particular topics. Two of them deal with new types of leave that have been made available through the federal government, although paid for by you and ostensibly reimbursed by tax credits. That's the new federal emergency paid sick leave, which is effective at the beginning of the next month. That's a 2-week emergency leave for a variety of COVID-19 related purposes. And the second type of leave is enacted by an amendment to the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, which is only for childcare purposes. Now, you may think, okay, I don't have 50 or more employees. I'm not subject to FMLA leave. Yeah, you are. The amendment makes everybody subject to FMLA for this one particular COVID-19 childcare related purpose. But I'll go through that, and I have to say I've been on the phone with clients for 2-3 hours each during the past couple of days. So this is going to be sort of a 30,000 foot level, but it will, I think, let you know what the new laws are. And the other two questions I want to deal with very quickly are, what can I do? What can I say? What can I ask my employees about in order to keep my employees and members safe? We're finding ourselves doing things we normally wouldn't do. I had the CEO of a client who shall remain nameless, because I think the CEO is on this call, call me more for forgiveness than permission in terms of stopping employees at the door and taking their temperatures if they look sick. And that's something you can do now. And finally, the last question, should your employees be coming to work, which is very much context driven, depending on what your operations are and how quickly you can get up non-personal contact operations. Before we go to the next slide, I do want to share something with you, which has struck me as a problem ever since I have seen it, and I have no solution to it. Very early this month, and in fact, my recollection, it was March 1st, the World Health Organization issued a release saying that they were seeing COVID-19 virus surviving 3 to 5 days on currency bills, and that actually in Wuhan, some financial institutions were sanitizing their currency. I don't think we've got that situation here yet, but please be aware that if your folks are handling, we all know how incredibly dirty coins are. And if you're as old as me, you remember the old urban legend from the 1980s that every $100 bill in circulation was contaminated with cocaine. Please, if you have employees who are handling currency, make them wash their hands more frequently, give them hand sanitizer, because that could be a vector of transmission, and I'm very, very afraid of it. Anyway, the next slide is a PRC emergency paid sick leave, which will become effective at the end of the month. Can we go to the next slide? I bet you we could. Anyway, I'll tell you what's on the next slide. Emergency paid sick leave, thank you, applies to all employers regardless of the number of employees you have. The only people who are exempt from this are very large employers who have over 500 employees. So if you have one employee, you're affected by this. It gives a new benefit of 2 weeks leave, which is deemed to be 80 hours for full-time employees and an equivalent 2-week average, which we have not been told how to calculate, for part-time employees. And it is paid for by you when the employee takes the leave. Now, the intent of the bill, the intent of the act as passed, is that that is immediately returned back into your pocket, because when you pay payroll, obviously, you send a check or make a notation and an advice over to the federal government, paying for withholding from your employees' salaries, the employee's share of Social Security, and things like that. Anything that you pay to an employee under the 2 weeks paid sick leave provision is an immediately available tax credit against your employer's share of Social Security tax, which is usually 6.2%. So you can take that credit at the end of the payroll period. And as a matter of fact, if you're paying out more under this emergency paid sick leave program than you owe in the Social Security tax, you will get a check. Now, of course, the IRS and Social Security all need to put new forms into effect, new regulations into effect. The last time I touched base with the IRS on this was Friday night. They are working diligently, and they believe that they will have this in place by the time it becomes effective on April 2nd. So it will be a line item, easy as pie thing to do. If you pay your payroll through somebody like ADP, that will be done automatically. Now, paid sick leave has broad categories of eligibility. And remember, this is on top of anything else you give your employees for PTO. There are 6 categories of people who are entitled as a matter of law to take emergency sick leave. And that's on the next slide. And it's not what we read in the press before last Wednesday. The original versions of the bill had people being able to take paid sick leave if, for example, like me, they were self-quarantining because my family members came from a hotspot, or would have been able to take the leave if the employer sent them home. That's not in the final law. The people who can take emergency paid sick leave of up to 2 weeks, 80 hours, are people who are subject to a formal government quarantine order. That's not just a huddle in place order. That's you are quarantined, sort of like they had in New Rochelle, where the National Guard established a boundary around the town. Or a doctor or other healthcare provider has given formal advice to the employee to quarantine. That can be either because they're sick, or because they've been exposed, or because they've traveled from Milan or something like that. But it has to be a doctor giving a formal order, or this employee is exhibiting the symptoms of COVID-19. The 3 big ones are dry cough, respiratory distress, and a fever of over 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit without any mediation by a fever-reducing medicine. If someone has those symptoms and they are actively seeking a medical diagnosis, they're trying to get into the doctor, then they're eligible for this additional 2 weeks of emergency paid sick leave. It doesn't cover people who just want to stay home. It doesn't cover people who just feel they're a little sick. Now, those 3 categories are when the employee themselves are subject to a quarantine order or a healthcare advice to quarantine, or they're feeling sick. The next 2 categories is where the employee is caring for someone who they are subject to a formal quarantine order, or someone who they have been advised by a healthcare provider to quarantine, or caring for a minor son or daughter who is at home during a school or daycare closure caused by COVID-19. And it's that last one, number 5 on the slides, that's causing us the most agita right now. Let's face it, if someone has symptoms, or someone has been told by a healthcare provider to quarantine, you don't want them in the office. But if someone is just saying, I got to stay home for my kid, I know he's 17 and a half, but he's not responsible enough to stay home from high school, that's where we're having problems. The last category is a catch-all category, and it hasn't been designated yet. That's someone who suffers from a substantially similar condition designated by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. There are no such conditions, so we don't have to worry about that one right now. And as the next slide shows, and I can't emphasize this too much because the early versions of the bill covered some of these things, and the early alerts that were sent out by some human resource professionals and law firms said emergency paid sick leave can be used for these conditions. It cannot. People who are scared to come to work, people who are told to go home by you people who have just returned from Japan or Iran or Milan, those folks don't get paid sick leave under the bill. Now, one of the questions that came up is what kind of documentation do you need for emergency paid sick leave? The statute doesn't say, and there are no regulations that have been issued on that so far, although the Department of Labor has been tasked with issuing regulations. I would not look for that particular regulation to come out by the 2nd, however. The type of documentation is what you can accept from that employee. All the schools are closed. Virtually all daycare is closed, although the Maryland closure order exempts certain parts of daycare, as does the Virginia closure order. So if somebody says, I have a 9-year-old who would otherwise be in school all day, and now they're not in school because of COVID-19, that's all you really know. It's a publicly available fact that their school's closed. If there is a formal quarantine imposed by a doctor or imposed on this individual by a governmental agency, then it's fair to ask them, show me the doctor note. The one thing where we are still a little sketchy is someone who calls in and says, I'm short of breath, I have 102 fever, I have a dry cough, and I'm trying to get to the doctor. I think in most cases, you can accept your employee's word for that for the first couple of days. If it becomes 3 days and they're still not getting to the doctor and still haven't gotten the doctor's order to self-quarantine, that becomes a little sketchy. And I think you are entitled to ask them what type of documentation they can provide you to show that they fit into that 3rd category of people who are qualified for paid sick leave. Anyway, that's emergency paid sick leave. That's for every employer. One of the questions we have here is, does the yeah, okay, I got a private question. Are there expectations or directions on how the new benefits should be communicated to employees? Because lots of staff had kids out of school. The Department of Labor has been directed to give you a new poster to put up with all those other posters in your break room about this. And that's supposed to be available online at the Department of Labor website within 7 days after the effective day of the bill. So that's the only legally required notification to employees. However, if an employee comes to you and says, look, I'm a single father, I have 3 elementary school aged kids, there is no one else from my family within 200 miles, I need to take care of them, you know, it would behoove the employer to note the availability of this leave, because there are provisions in the law that provide for liability on the part of the employer if the employer interferes with or retaliates for the employee's ability to take the leave. So your HR folks or whoever coordinates leave for you should be very careful. If anyone comes to them and presents and says, hey, I have this problem, don't hide the leave from them, but we will have a poster and you'll put it up and people will read it with the exact same attention they read all the other posters, which is nothing. Anyway, emergency paid sick leave is the first part. The second part is the Family and Medical Leave Act Expansion Act. Some of you who have fewer than 50 employees may not have dealt with the FMLA before. Generally speaking, before this bill, the FMLA applies to employers with 50 or more employees, and it provides up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to care for somebody with a critical medical condition or to care for yourself. And the most common place we see FMLA leave is maternity and paternity leave. That's off the table. This new expansion applies to everybody, not just those with more than 50 employees. It is employer paid leave, which is completely different. The first 2 weeks can be unpaid, or the employee can use existing leave other than FMLA leave such as sick pay if they have a couple of weeks of PTO, or even the way the statute's written, they can use the emergency paid sick leave for the first 2 weeks to get some money in for them. Otherwise, it'll be unpaid. Normally, under the FMLA, there's something called a cram down provision where the employer can force the employee to use up paid leave. Can't do that for this. It is the employee's choice as to whether or not they use that paid leave for the first 2 weeks. Then the next 10 weeks are paid by you. And that again is subject to the exact same reimbursement scheme. You get an immediate credit against your 6.2% Social Security portion that the employer ordinarily pays. And if you pay more on FMLA COVID-19 leave, well, then you owe in Social Security taxes, you will get a check. And the IRS is promising us that they're putting things in place to get those checks out rapidly. There's another question. Do the benefits mirror the effective date of 4/2, or are they covered today? They are only effective on April 2nd. So right now, there's no such thing as emergency paid sick leave. Right now, there's no such thing as family and medical leave for this purpose. And the only purpose that made it into the law, which is child care for a minor son or daughter who's unable to go to school or child care due to COVID-19 restrictions. Again, this is something that changed radically, as far as I can track it down, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. last Monday morning. Prior versions of the bill had all sorts of things you could take FMLA leave for related to the virus. The only thing that passed and that was signed into law is that you can take the 12 weeks of FMLA leave to care for your minor son or daughter who's unable to go to school. And I should also note one more thing. Normally, to be entitled to FMLA leave, an employee has to have worked for you for 12 months or 1,250 hours. Not so for this type of leave. As long as the employee has worked for 30 days, that's good enough. So those of you who've never had to deal with FMLA, as I say, the Department of Labor promises us a new form with the certification requirements before the April 2nd date. And it should be pretty easy. The Department of Labor maintains FMLA forms on its website, and there's really no reason ever to generate your own form. The FMLA forms by DOL are pre-approved, and you should use those. Next slide. There are two things you should keep in mind. The second, which is everybody's been working real hard to get the new rules and forms in place. The first is the DOL is supposed to do a rulemaking to exclude smaller employers, people under 50 employees, the folks who are excluded from FMLA now, but not excluded from the new FMLA COVID-19, to make rules to exclude companies with under 50 employees from both forms of the new leave if giving the leave would jeopardize the viability of the business as a going concern. When are we going to see those rules? The DOL promises them again by April 2nd. What kind of showing is going to be necessary? Well, we don't know. Are you going to have to show you're going to go bankrupt if you give this leave? Probably not, but it's going to have to be a fairly substantial financial impact. There's a question that says, how does the employee certify they're eligible for the FMLA? That again, since this is only for people staying home to take care of their kids, generally you're not going to worry about certification if their kids are school age. If their kids are preschool age and in daycare, you might ask them for a letter from the daycare provider. That is supposed to be made clear in the new FMLA form that the Department of Labor is issuing. Second part of that question is, if they've taken other FMLA, is that subtracted from the 12 weeks? Absolutely yes. This change to the FMLA Act doesn't give more leave. It just adds one additional circumstance to the list of circumstances under which an employee can take FMLA leave. And it expands the number of employers and to whom it is subject. and also the number of employees who can take the benefit. But if somebody's already taken 8 weeks for a serious medical condition, or 9 weeks because they've just given birth, then that is subtracted from the 12 weeks, and they don't have the additional leave eligibility under FMLA expansion. Let me just go through the next couple of slides very quickly, because most of these are common sense questions, and I want to hear the folks from CUNA Mutual, and I'm sure we all want to. This is the first group of questions I started getting about 3 weeks ago. What can I ask my employee? In fact, I had one circumstance with a client that was not a credit union where they had to get rid of their security company because the security company refused to ask these questions, thinking that they violated HIPAA or Title VII of the Federal Civil Rights Act. Can I take my employee's temperature? Can I ask them if they have a fever or a cough or respiratory distress? Can I send them home if they're sick? Can I tell people who've just gotten back from Milan to stay home for 14 days? Can I require telework? Can I require them? We're all sort of becoming elementary school teachers again. Require them to have certain sanitary practices. Can I, if I'm interviewing someone, require them to test negative? If I hire someone and they test positive, can I say, nope, you're not working here? The answer to every one of these questions is yes. And the EEOC, which actually had been sitting on its almost 10-year-old, well, more than 10-year-old guidance on the H1N1 virus, remember that one? Finally revised that again just on the 19th to make clear that none of these questions, even though they're questions about an employee's health and physical condition, none of these questions are implicating the Americans with Disabilities Act or anything else. Let's flip over to the next slide. You should know that OSHA has issued a very, very good guidance, not on what the law is, but what on a practical level, the type of precautions that should be taken by employers in various businesses. And they say under the general duty clause, prompt identification and isolation of potentially infectious individuals is a critical step. In other words, you're an employer, you have a duty to have a safe workplace. Prompt identification of potentially infectious individuals is part of that general duty under OSHA. The only thing that you don't have to ask your employees that you should keep away from is shown on the next slide. Don't probe into their individual circumstances that could increase their vulnerability, because these, while they generally increase the severity, they really don't have as much to do with increasing the transmission rate. You can say to someone, do you have a cough? Do you have a fever? But don't say, do you have asthma? Do you have diabetes? Do you have a compromised immune system? The EEOC thinks that's too much information, TMI, about the physical condition of your employee, and it's not directly related to preventing the spread of COVID-19. Instead, it assesses the individual's potential severity. The other thing that the EEOC is just all over is not hiring people because they look Chinese. But everybody who's on this call, and I saw the names as you came on, are all too smart to do that. So that's where I am. That's where we are. We're anxiously awaiting the unemployment provisions, particularly of the Senate bill that Senator Van Hollen spoke about. And that's your 30,000-foot view, and I'll hand it over to John and to bring it to the CUNA Mutual folks.
John, thank you very much, and thanks for all of your help with everything that we've been working on, and for the letter again. Had a question, a couple of private questions. Will the slides be made available to people later? Yes, we will make these slides available. We'll make sure that the appropriate links are working that are embedded in the presentation, so you can click and go there. And just want to remind everybody that the resource page that's out there on our website is updated on a regular basis, just because things are so fluid. But there's a lot of information, but you can get to everything through that page. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris and to Kurt. What I would ask Chris and Kurt, if possible, if you guys could mute yourselves when you're not talking, that way we'll get away from the echo. So I'll go ahead and start. Chris?
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great.
Yep.
So I think first and foremost, I just want to thank everyone on the call for the continued commitment to our credit union members. And I truly mean that. While myself, as well as probably the vast majority of the other presenters on today's call are hunkered down in our home offices, we certainly recognize that you and your employees and team members are out on the front lines taking care of our members. So genuinely appreciate that commitment. Probably a good time, while it should go without saying, because many of you are still in the workplace, really want to emphasize good workplace hygiene. You know, John touched on this a little bit with the cash and the currency, but a good time to regularly or routinely remind our team members of general good workplace hygiene. Things like covering their mouths when coughing or sneezing, avoiding contact with sick individuals, washing the hands frequently, tissue, sanitizer throughout the credit union locations, regularly and frequently wiping down surfaces, emptying trash cans, and you know, possibly even wearing gloves when possible to avoid touching that dirty currency. Again, I know that probably seems like a given, but I think it's important that we continue to reinforce that with our team members, and of course encouraging them to stay home if they're feeling ill. So kind of going along with that, the other reality is that many of us who previously were not working remotely are now being thrust into a more virtual workplace environment. Which I support that. Anytime there's non-essential personnel, I think it's important that we consider remote options. But the reality is that this does create new exposures. So it's important to take this time to review those remote workplace policies and reinforce them with the team members, make sure they understand those policies, and make sure that they have access to all necessary tools and resources to be successful. So I kind of look at it from like two different perspectives when there's these telework questions that we're receiving from the credit unions. It sort of has been a combination of either the data or the privacy concerns, and then the people aspect of it. So in the interest of time, because I've got a couple other important things I want to cover, I'll hit them kind of quickly and then open it up for questions. But from that data perspective, you know, really important that we are reinforcing sound data security standards. A lot of these team members, again, who previously haven't worked from home, may not understand the requirements for teleworkers. So we want to make sure that wherever possible that we're requiring things like a VPN, tokens or one-time passwords, avoiding single sign-in authentication wherever possible, asking employees to make sure that they have proper security around their home broadband network. Ideally, we want to be using credit union issued devices. However, I understand, given this unprecedented situation where we may not have enough laptops to go around for all the employees that are teleworking, there may be times when we have to employ a bring your own device option. So important to make sure that those devices also are properly updated, have antivirus software. We really want to reinforce the requirements for email encryption, properly securing data and all attachments. If you're not using a data loss prevention tool, might be a good opportunity to explore what is out there. From the people side of this, and this is probably where I would say we may be a little behind, is we want to make sure that we're checking in on our team members' mental health and wellness. We're hearing from credit unions who are expressing concerns around decreased employee morale, challenges with managing and monitoring team member productivity, increased stress and anxiety. So really a great opportunity to show our team members how we can come together and that we care for our team members. I would say don't be afraid to over communicate right now. Meet regularly. We've got a lot of team members out there that are accustomed to those water cooler discussions and those networking opportunities. So we can do that. We have virtual options where we can do that. So I would encourage you to use virtual meetings. Have your team members turn their cameras on so they can see each other whenever possible. If you have other employee assistance programs or resources that are available, make sure you reinforce those, share those with your team members. And it may sound, kind of silly, but maybe consider having some type of virtual team building activities to keep employee morale up. It's a big part of this, is making sure that we focus on our mental health. So I can't stress that enough. Again, in the interest of time, I think I'll try to get through the slides and then we'll circle back and see if there's any questions. So John, what do we have up next there? I believe it's children in the workplace. Yep. So the other side of this is for those of you that are, all of you are essential and continuing to go to the branches. We're having some questions around allowing children in the office. And so while that environment may seem to make sense right now, we have to realize that all offices differ greatly, and it can be illogical and introduce more risk for some. So I would implore you to carefully evaluate your policies for allowing children in the workplace. Some of the additional risks that this would certainly introduce: security and safety, liability, really even job performance and productivity of those employees and the employees around them. So really important to, if you're going to explore this option, make sure you're discussing those plans of allowing children in the workplace with your legal counsel, and certainly have a written board-approved policy that has very detailed procedures and expectations around children in the workplace. Some of the specifics that you may want to consider: so employee eligibility, age of the child, so minimums and maximums, location. You got to think about the space available, proper disposal of diapers and things like that, designated breastfeeding areas. Are we going to have children-free zones, and do we have proper emergency procedures for credit unions out there that have gone through ALICE or active shooter training? You've probably all been properly trained on how to respond, the run, hide, fight methodology. So, how would we make sure that we're taking care of the children in the workplace? And of course, we want to do all of this and being sure that we're not discriminating or excluding, so not allowing certain departments or business areas of the credit union to bring their children in, or restricting certain branches, or not making accommodations for children with disabilities or special needs. So a lot of considerations. And so again, while this may be maybe a good solution for some credit unions, would really encourage you to work closely with your legal counsel. Next slide. So some of this was already covered by Tony and John, but I will just reinforce that yes, we are seeing some fraudsters that have launched coronavirus-themed phishing attacks to deliver malware. So this is typically the credential stealing banking Trojan variant, and we're seeing those emails come in that are purporting to be from the CDC or the World Health Organization. We've also seen several rogue websites out there. So sometimes the email will not have a attachment, but it will be a link that will bring you back to a corrupt website. So just make sure that we are aware that we're conducting phishing-themed security training for all of our team members. make sure that we're warning employees of these phishing scams and providing clear instructions to not open those attachments or click on links, and maybe even alerting members of these scams through either text, email, newsletters, or posting those on your website. What else do we have there, John? So we're getting a lot of questions as well around, and so again, some of this was covered, and I'll give Kurt an opportunity to comment on this as well. But we are getting a lot of questions around just currency storage, and also just general security of our employees. So while we do have several team members that are working in the branch, and it's a reduced workforce, so typically, several credit union employees, and now we just have a handful of essential team members that are keeping the branch up and running. It's important to make sure that we stay focused on good opening and closing procedures. Internal controls, we can't lose sight of internal controls as well. But again, the questions we're receiving a lot of around reduction in staff, closing branches. So if you are considering closing certain locations, make sure that you, again, all of this is whenever possible, delete the cash on hand, follow your appropriate cash transportation and storage guidelines. It is permissible to transport currency, but there are some very specific limits around that currency transportation and storage. So important to understand those currency and vault specification and transportation guidelines. And a lot of that is dependent on the technology or security controls that you have on your money vaults or safes, things like that. Kurt, do you want to speak to the increase to on-premise? Do we have Kurt on the line, John? I know there was some connectivity issues earlier.
Yeah, I know there were some problems in actually being able to hear him when he's speaking. Kurt, are you there?
I am. Are you able to hear me okay?
There you go. We can hear you. Seems there's a delay of some type. Chris, do you think you could finish it up for us?
Yep. Yeah, so I'll push through and then we'll see if we have any specific questions for Kurt. I think I covered a lot of this. We want to make sure that we're properly communicating any changed office hours or closings, alternative locations. We know a lot of the credit unions are keeping their off-premise ATMs stocked with currency. So again, just maintaining proper security controls around ATM replenishment. Encourage your team members to have a heightened sense of security or sense of awareness at this time. Unfortunately, we know that it's times like this when the bad guys come out. So we want to make sure that we're not doing anything silly like replenishing our ATMs in the evening, when it's dark, or we want to make sure that we're not doing those activities or fulfilling those activities alone, but we want to encourage teams of two. So again, just practicing good storage and transportation guidelines. If anybody has any specific questions around security or opening and closing procedures, I definitely would encourage you to reach out to us. We have a team of security and operations risk consultants that are ready to field those incoming questions. So we would again encourage you to reach out to your property and casualty consultant or reach out to the risk management team directly. I think we had one more slide. Oh, maybe not.
I think that's it. Yeah, and just to reinforce, Chris, your point, I know last week, especially with the in some of our discussions with the NCUA and with the commissioner, one of the challenges and concerns is making the ATM issue and just kind of the cash handling policy to make sure that there's enough money. Anecdotally, went to 2 ATMs this weekend in the town where I'm at, and both ATMs, two of the ATMs were actually out of cash. So people standing around there were talking a little bit. So just keep in mind those issues as we move forward. The longer this goes, probably the more concern that could be. All right, I don't see any other questions right now for you guys. Like I said, we'll be putting out the deck at the end for everybody, and I'll make sure that we have contact information embedded in there for each of our speakers for everyone. So any other questions? I'm asking folks to use the chat feature. I'm a little hesitant to take everybody off of hold right now. Hopefully we've incorporated the questions that you've sent in earlier with some of the folks. I did reach out to a couple of you on a few questions that either the speakers haven't addressed yet or weren't prepared to answer. I'm looking at the chat at this point in time. We don't have anything else. I do want to go back to just one question with regard to CDFIs and LCIUs. Just a reminder that the NCUA also has their grants for credit unions that, for equipment or other needs at this time as an emergency grant program. And then finally, before we let you all go, there's my contact information. Feel free to contact me at any time. We'll also have a resource page with the rest of our team for specific issues. Just so you know, on our website, what we've done is there's the resource page for credit unions. Also have a question on, we have the resource page for you as credit unions. We also have a resource page, league info site. You can get through the website, especially for our affiliates. You can get right to there and log in. There's another whole set of resources and resource guides through our league info site platform. And then finally, we've created a consumer page that you'll notice it has all credit unions that have members in the state of Maryland that a consumer can go to. It links to your website. It also has the call-in number for the call center or best we could find. Our team's been updating that. We've tried not to bother you with surveys or with a lot of questions with regard to what's going on. When the governor's office contacted us, we created that page. So if a consumer is looking for what specific programs their credit union is doing, they can get to that immediately and very quickly. There's a question that's out there with regard to, is the landlord considered essential to the building? And that I can't answer. I will get a response out to the group before we send everything out on that. I do know that if certain buildings are closed, there have been cases where certain buildings are closed and credit unions have had to close that branch and then notify people that there's other branches available. In certain cases, the branch has been closed, and some smaller credit unions where that's the only branch they have. And you just have to notify the NCUA within, I believe it's 5 days, that you have to close access, physical access, but if people can access you electronically or over the phone, that's acceptable. There's nothing you can do about that at this point, but I'll get a definitive answer with regard to the landlord question to get that back out to everybody. Again, I just want to thank all of our speakers. Senator Van Hollen, if you get a chance to run into him, thank him for all of his time and efforts over the last couple of weeks and being available to listen to credit union concerns and also make sure that credit unions are included in the legislation and being a voice for our Senator Cardin's done the same on the Senate side, and so have our the House folks. So we just want to thank them. Want to thank John Bredehoft, thank John Cutchy from the NCUA, Tony Salazar, Commissioner from Maryland, Brian Williams for being available earlier, and Chris and Kurt. Want to thank you all. So that's all we have, folks. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your patience for getting through things with us in the beginning. Be safe, and again, don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that we can do or help with, or if you have any questions. Have a good day and be safe.